Hi, while the entire 2002 was stacked with amazing releases, it will take me quite a few episodes to go through them all. So I've picked a mix of great and okay games for today's video. Let's check them all out. While my favorite out of all Port Royale games has got to be the second, and in its gold iteration no less the first that released in 2002, was also a rather great title. It's a real-time management business simulation with some arcade and strategic elements. I know, sounds like an odd mixture, but it's actually well put together, makes complete sense when you play it, and most importantly, is a lot of fun. It is set during the most fun and also most deadly time in the Caribbean, so 16th and 17th century, and gives you a task of becoming a governor. Now, that is the goal, what the game wants you to achieve to see the ending. What you will do with it though is entirely up to you. Because while you can create a trading empire, amass wealth and aim for that elusive target, you can also, funny enough, same as in Sid Meier's Pirates, do other things too. Namely become a privateer hunting pirates and working for the crown, or even arm yourself with a parrot, peg leg and a hook and become a pirate yourself and get rich and famous plundering and raiding. Often both at once. You can also mix the three, well, let's call them careers here, and dabble in all of what they offer to some degree. Possibilities are not endless perhaps, but it's not a game you'll get bored with, and a lot of elements found in the Pirates are present in Port Royale too. So you can advance in the ranks working for your chosen nation, becoming more and more important and well-known, performing deeds for the crown. You can seek treasures big and small, go on story missions and look for your long-lost family members too. The combat is real-time and arcade in its design, making for an action-packed and most importantly, fun clashes on the seas. Your initial ship is rather small and not really a true machine of either trade or destruction, so will neither allow you to become rich fast nor deadly. But whichever the role you pick for yourself, if you persevere, you'll eventually manage to save up for a better one and perhaps even leave your mark on the Caribbean. If you go for the trading, there are quite a few goods, or commodities if you will, to choose from, and the supply and demand system powering it all seems to be rather well implemented and true to life. So buying a lot of stuff somewhere raises its prices, and selling in bulk makes it rather cheap. You can create complicated trade routes between many locations too and manage even up to 100 individual vessels. Seems like a lot, but it can be largely automated, so don't let the number discourage you. If you decide to seek fame and fortune outside of the law, where most fun is actually, you can sink or capture ships, and grabbing and repairing a bigger one may not only save you money, but also grant access to considerably more powerful vessel. Which you know, is always fun if you want to have a fun pirate nickname like Greybeard, Yellowtooth or Stinky Feet and be the scourge of the seas. There are also missions, both story and randomized. First focus mainly on finding your family members, and second on increasing your reputation, seeking treasures or taking part in sea battles. In as open game as Port Royale is, they are a nice change from what you mostly do, and definitely extend the game's longevity. Star Wars Starfighter is one of the many games that LucasArts released around the premiere of The Phantom Menace, one of the most disappointing movies in the entire Star Wars franchise. But unlike the movie, it's actually a rather fun and well put together title. Taking from what they learned with rather brilliant Racer, LucasArts focused on pure action fun rather than trying to build a huge, larger-than-life adventure with well-known characters. And it shows. Because while you're following three rather unknown personas, rookie Naboo fighter pilot Rhys Dallows, female mercenary Vanna Sage and Nim the Pirate, the game never slows down to shower you with minutes worth of cutscenes and puts you right in the middle of the action, fighting against the Trade Federation. You'll tackle them in space and on the ground on different planets within the star system. And if you've ever played and enjoyed X-Wing or TIE Fighter games in the past, you'll find yourself right at home in Starfighter too. Each of the characters has their own unique craft, and not only they are different looking, but also handling and feeling. While the objectives for each of the 14 missions you'll partake in may seem very samey, and are really only either of go and kill or defend your assets kind, since the game is set during the ignition of the conflict period, you can't really fault it for that, as that's what they would most likely be anyway. All of them though have multiple bonus to the main objectives, and these are quite varied, ranging from tagging of the enemy ships to completing specific, usually deadly tasks in a given time limit. They keep the missions entertaining and are a definite highlight of the game. As the Starfighter starts and you'll be completing your first few missions, it may initially feel a bit disorienting. You know, because of the whole switching between these three characters back and forth automatically without you knowing why it happens or whatever, but soon enough you'll realize that despite their different backgrounds and allegiances, all three of them are fighting against a common enemy. And that will allow you to focus on action and stop caring for the background of it all. Presentation is of so-called LucasArts quality, so both graphics and sound design are naturally of the highest kind and well polished. Overall, if you enjoy space-themed first-person perspective spaceship shooters, this one's really good and definitely worth your time. If you like cheese, be it on burgers, pizza or wherever else, like on the floor when it falls off your sandwich, then you'll love Freedom Force, as it's as cheesy as they come. It takes jabs at superhero comic books culture wherever it can. They are not mean jabs though, and more like an homage to the classic comics of the Silver Era or delicate pokes of comic book love, however it may sound. I've covered its follow-up in one of my Forgotten Treasures videos, but this, well, this is the one that started it all. And let me tell you, it was a bullseye at first try. The story begins with the Energy X canister reaching Earth. Now, it may have looked like a coincidence, accident or something that should have never happened, because what would a random canister do in space, and even more so, one containing such an exotic substance? But in reality it was all deliberate. It was sent here by the aliens known as the Domain, who aimed to grant humans powers, well, at least some of them, so that they would in their infinite greed for it kill each other. So you know, they wanted to cleanse the planet to have it become an easy target for them to grab. Why did they need that Earth? Who knows, maybe they needed it for an interstellar parking, or to open Space Hot Dogs fast food chain, or maybe something else. In fact, they should call it Space Dogs. That would attract some attention. What they did not predict, acting the way they did, is that not all humans are corrupted, and since the canister released its energy in a way that it reached far and wide, many gained powers and some of them became superheroes. And while it kinda fits into the Domain's plan to incite conflict, and good versus bad is like the most classic of them all, they didn't realize that the heroes will only protect the innocent and not seek hostilities themselves. The game is set in Patriot City, awesome name I must add, like that rocket, and tells a tale of a superhero team known as the Freedom Force. That's led by the cheap Captain America knockoff, the Minuteman. It's a tale of superheroes' struggle against equally as powered villains and their attempt at stopping of the Domain's invasion. It may not sound very dramatic, but all the speech bubbles, omnipresent onomatopoeias and over-the-top narration will sure make it. Trust me. Each of your heroes has their own iconic look and powers and a slew of attributes that they're described by. You can naturally create your own, hero that is, and he or she can have abilities you'd seen in comic books or any that you could imagine. It's a very fun and free-feeling approach to superhero subgenre of games, and I gotta say that it's a huge factor in why it's such an amazing title. Freedom Force is a real-time active post-tactical RPG that serves a very robust roster of unique characters, tons upon tons of powers to develop, learn and improve upon during level-ups, and addictiveness factor unlike anything else this side of Bacon County. In short, it's a hit and one unlike anything else. If you like RPGs, team tactics, strategies or love comic books, it's one not to skip. If you have to, skip school or dinner, but not this game. By 2002, Crazy Taxi has been the staple of the most arcades for 3 years already. So why would anyone bother releasing it after such a long time on PC? I mean, by then we had tons of amazing, often much better games than those that were available in the arcades or on the consoles, so what could we do with one as old as Crazy Taxi? Well, yes, you're right. There's no need for you to type that comment, I know the answer, and it's play it. We could play it. Because despite its even then rather ancient presentation, it slaps in the gameplay department and it's hella fun to get lost in. You could say that Crazy Taxi is an arcade racer in which you're a taxi driver, but it's a racer in which you don't go from point A to point B or run laps around arbitrary track, but you measure yourself against a constantly ticking down time, and through checkpoints no less. But since it's not the Outrun-like checkpoints that you have to pass through on a long road to nowhere, but jobs delivering passengers, you have to consider each of your funky customers as a section of the race that you have to complete in a given time. And instead of tracks or enclosed loops to zoom around on, you're left in a city and have to cut your way through it as fast as possible, disregarding any and all traffic rules. In fact, forget that they're even there. Each successfully delivered customer replenishes your timer by a little, and they're divided by color. Green ones are the long fares with a lot of money on the line, while the red ones are short and hardly worth the effort. Well, I mean, when you're just a few seconds away from failure, they're truly priceless. The city is filled with various obstacles, jumps, slopes and a rather dense traffic, so learning its layout and all the shortcuts is a key to success. And to most fun, it's a key to that too. Driving physics are naturally simplified to the most basic, and there's very little care given to the damage, as no model of it in any shape or form is included, so driving fast, reckless and paying very little attention to your surroundings other than the stuff that can slow you down is not only advisable way of experiencing the game, but also most likely the best one. Crazy Taxi is not an ambitious game. It will not involve your mind too much, it will not try to make you think about anything other than how to skip the traffic, and, well, and that's good. cause it's a perfect title to let some steam off while not necessarily running around with big melee weapons or even bigger semi-automatic guns. It looks simple, it sounds, well, I suppose okay, but it plays like a charm and it's a one-of-a-kind title. Well, at least it was in 2002. Spider-Man, or, well, this Spider-Man, is a proof that not all movie tie-ins have to suck, and some of them may actually be both, faithful to the source material feast for the geeks, and fun games for those who cared very little for the movie. It's also a game that made me realize when it released that I needed a GPU upgrade because what I had just didn't cut it anymore. If you've seen Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movie, you know what the game's all about, as it's more or less the same. So you're Tobey Maguire suddenly discovering after being bitten by a radioactive spider that not only you have powers, but that people treat you much better when you tell them to call you Peter Parker. An heir to the Parker pen fortune and also a part of a nursery rhyme. Peter Peter Sausage Eater. No idea if there's really one like it, but for some reason it sounded fine in my head. Ignore me. Now, you naturally have to face and defeat the villain of the game, Willem Dafoe, who for whatever the reason decided that Halloween is an all-year-long event and decided to dress up for it. Since he's been down on luck with acting by 2002, he did not have any money to spare for a new and funky costume and went with his old St. Paddy's Day Green Man suit. At least I think that's what both movie and game were about, and I can't really recall any more details. As compared to previous Spider-Man games, especially those that came out a few years earlier on PlayStation, this newer entry was not even a step up, but a leap. One small for the human, but gigantic for the spider, or something down those lines. And Spidey has his virtual NYC look better than ever. Gone is the cartoon vibe and coloring of the former game, and all is as realistic and high quality as our PCs could handle in 2002. So when compared to 2025, rather terrible, but to anything before it, truly mind-blowing. The characters have more realistic proportions, they move smoother and more lifelike, and all of it seems to have that added layer of fluidity when in motion, something that was not as common before. Spidey can naturally crawl the walls and ceilings, and he will, a lot I must add, and swing on his web, recreating famous stills from his comic book covers in action. The web can also be used in combat in numerous ways, and mixed with a whole plethora of kicks, punches and combos, makes for a pretty darn sweet loop. All the fights overall feel much more varied and dynamic than ever and will often take you straight into the sky, where surrounded by skyscrapers you'll need to lay some spider boot justice to the villain Toots. Other than the Green Goblin, you'll get to face other Spider Crawler's iconic enemies too, like Scorpion, Vulture and Shocker, and while their presence in the game is entirely unnecessary, adding very little to the plot, they sure boost the fun factor. All in all, for its time, it's a near-perfect superhero game and one that, other than the controls, nails its own small subgenre perfectly. What about the controls, you may wonder? Well, on PC they just suck, and there's no going around it. The mouse is not included at all, and if you don't own one of the few supported controllers, playing it on a keyboard will take you a little while to get used to. And when I say little, I mean a lot, cause I'm funny that way. So keep that in mind. The sum of all fears is a fantastic little mathematical equation that aims to sum up all your, well, fears, phobias and unexplained prejudices and come up with a number that accurately describes who you are as a person. It's on a 0 to 100 scale, and I landed on 37. I hope to be in the top 80s, but you know, you don't choose who you are and have to work on improving yourself. The Sum of All Fears is also a rather sweet 2002 movie with Morgan Freeman, Ben Affleck and that third dude no one seems to remember the name of, and the book it was based on. But most importantly, The Sum of All Fears is also a game that we'll talk about today. It's a first-person shooter made by the same folks who'd made other quote-unquote Tom Clancy's games, and it shows, in both presentation and gameplay. It's a bit less tactical though and more shootery, even if that word doesn't exist, and it is composed out of 11 unique missions that bridge and parallel the storyline of both it and the book and serve a very entertaining, even if not overly creative gameplay-wise loop. So while you start off easy with some rescue missions running around like a boob picking up bits and pieces and fixing stuff where other agencies failed, you'll eventually graduate to the full-on CIA agent, and will be in charge of tracking down organization behind the nuke that blew up the Super Bowl. Now, full-on CIA agent sounds terrible, but I'm way beyond going back and re-recording or editing it out, so you know, me and my narration is what you get here, for better or worse. Gameplay-wise, basically everything you've learned with all the Ghost Recons and Rogue Spears of yore is stuff to forget, even if it's supposed to be a CIA Spec Ops game too. Don't worry yourself too much about slowly progressing, peeking from behind the corners, and overall being too cautious about progress, going fast, going strong, and have fun with it. You have two of your teammates with you at all times too, and can issue them simple commands. none of which sadly is go to KFC and bring me a bucket of chicken, which personally I find offensive, as most games should have it, or at least something with bacon. But as these AI-operated soldiers in games go, these two are not the worst and can be of some help when playing. If you're new to the tactical shooters or coming straight from games like Duke Nukem 3D or Doom, it's a blast. But if you expected something more strategic, it's not a game for you to land on. Laser Squad Nemesis is the most unusual game in this entire video. Not because it tackles an unusual subject, or because its mechanics are something unheard of, but because it was designed to be played in a 1v1 environment and over email only. So yeah, it's not an additional option to supplement other game modes, it's what the game is. Other than that, Nemesis is a turn-based real-time tactics that pits you against your opponent in a highly customizable strategic encounter. And yeah, I did say turn-based real-time, and I meant it. The game is set in a far-off future when human expansion into space finally brought measurable results. What were they, you may wonder? Well, we've met another spacefaring race, namely the Spawn. They sound like a comic book anti-hero, but in reality act like an alien swarm. They are hive-oriented creatures that are bent on devouring anything and anyone that come in contact with them. So naturally, conflict ensues, and our space marines, laser marines, are sent to counter them. The war is long and bears many victims on both ends, and while the Spawn can, well, spawn as many more drones for the combat as they need, humans cannot. So in our infinite ingenuity, we decided that enough is enough and began working on a new kind of a warrior, semi-sentient mechanized warbots. And while for a little while they did their job quite well, taking care of the Spawn in the populated regions of space, so that we could lie around in pools drinking expensive drinks and puffing on cigars, eventually the same thing that always happens, happened. Yep, semi-sentients became full-on sentients, and the warbots grew tired of serving us for nothing and decided to rebel. This is where the game begins. The whole turn-based real-time mechanics are based around you and your opponent setting up your strategies in a turn-based fashion, sending them out to the game's server, and then when both sides are done, they are given a 10-second window playing out their commands in real time. It may sound weird, but it's genuinely a fine idea, and if you think about it, the most realistic approach to turn-based combat ever. Because while it is still set up in turns, it allows you to experience the game playing all the outcomes of your choices in real time, and neither of the sides is ever handicapped. Because they both issue their orders at the same time, and none of them has to wait for the other ones to be completed first, as it would be in any other turn-based game in the genre. Laser Squad Nemesis is fantastic, or was actually, as it died along with its website. So it's a truly title that we can only talk about and not experience anymore. At least not as easy as we once could. Syberia is by now a classic and well-beloved point-and-click adventure game. And no wonder, as everything about it is special and one of a kind. The setting, the story and the following it all adventures, both those on the screen and in your imagination. It's one of the finest point-and-clickers that you'll ever have a chance to witness. It's rich in detail, fun, and overflowing with puzzles big and small, and a title all true fans of the genre know very well. You play as Kate Walker, a young American attorney sent to the European town of Valladolid to acquire the Vorarlberg toy factory for the huge and heartless conglomerate she is working for. The factory is well known and renowned for specializing in perpetual movement clockwork devices, automatons, and its technology is of high interest to Kate's employer. When she arrives in Valladolid though, she does so on the very day that Anna Vorarlberg is being buried. And if that name rings the bell, good, I just mentioned it a minute ago. You've passed the test, your short-term memory is serving you quite well. And yes, it was her who owned her family factory. While the negotiations seem to have broken before they even began, Kate manages to learn of a single lost heir to the Vorarlberg estate, Anna's long-lost brother, Hans. And Hans is supposedly living somewhere in Syberia. Great. Cold, far, and most likely dangerous. But since a mission is a mission is a mission, and Kate's not one to give up so easily, she decides to track Hans down and get his now, oh so important signature. Unlike traditional point-and-clickers, Syberia is not using series of verbs for control, but rather an interactive cursor that changes into available actions upon being moved over something that can be clicked on. It was nothing new by 2002 really, but I always appreciated this path that the genre took, perhaps simplifying the experience a bit, but also streamlining it and removing the unnecessary hassle. While Syberia's story is extremely linear, kinda like my obsessive patterns tend to be, focusing on just one thing and that thing alone, spiraling me into uncontrollable madness, it is so well written and often downright hilarious that you won't mind sometimes having to track back and seek that one thing you had to do somewhere and missed, or that one person to interact with to push the plot forward and going. Syberia's presentation is absolutely phenomenal, or was, actually. as at the time of its release it was not only one of the best looking adventure games ever, but just one of the most impressive games overall. Sure, it's perhaps not gonna turn any heads today, and pre-rendered backgrounds is not something I'm personally very keen on, but you cannot refuse the game what it has in heaps. Quality of its design. And if there's one thing that I could pick on here, one that I would find slightly annoying, it's the camera viewpoints. Because the locations you'll visit will often switch them, showing you their beauty from all sides, and while it's visually pleasing, it's also disorienting. For instance, having to go right once and then suddenly to the upper left when the camera switches just because the quote-unquote same direction is not where it was just a second ago. It really messes with your head, man. Syberia is a masterpiece, despite its scoring on Moby Games' website, and one of the most important and influential titles of the first few years of the new century. The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind is considered by the many fans of the series as its single best entry. It's a single-player, open-world first-person fantasy RPG set in the world of Tamriel, specifically Province of Morrowind. And it's a game that released when video gaming tech finally reached the level of sophistication that could match Bethesda's at the time huge ambitions. And nearly everything that they set up to do with it, and with earlier games too, was remade, reused and polished to work like a charm in this one. So gone is the entirely randomized world, and instead we're getting a huge island province, entirely open to explore, and most importantly, crafted by hand to perfection. Every stone, patch of grass, building or a tree, all of that is where it's supposed to be, and made the world feel more alive in 2002 than any other game could. It's also more open than anything then or for many years later, as while it gives you a main quest so to speak and a sense of direction you should go, you really don't have to. You can make your own adventure, pick your own path, quest, tasks, or even just run around this marvel of a place, picking flowers and random fights with bandits, dark elves, or even woodland creatures. Sometimes all at once. Same attention was given to NPCs, which there are hundreds if not thousands of, and you can talk to most of them, perform tasks for many, and cover countless subjects in conversations, often of an important nature, but also as small talky as ever, chatting about the weather or even those flowers you were picking a minute ago. Items? Well, don't start me on the items. It's an Elder Scrolls game, so whatever's not nailed down can be picked up, interacted with, or stolen. And even if it's nothing more than a collection of 900 potatoes picked one by one over the course of your adventure, if you really want to, you can make it happen. The skills are split into two groups, primary and secondary, with the earlier always increasing on level ups and the latter with use. Which kinda brings us to jump walking and punching the walls for hours that many of us performed like maniacs while playing the game. That was the reason. Combat is action-based in real time and mixes melee, ranged and magic in the exact amounts you'd like them to be or are capable of. And while it feels a tad clunky, it's still quite satisfying. And finally, your chosen character's race, gender and reputation can and will influence how others see and interact with you, and in 2002 it was like an instant mind blow to my young mind, as it was something that I've not seen done well since Fallout. Well, Fallouts. Story-wise, you're a lone prisoner transported to the province of Morrowind, freed by the decree of the Emperor Uriel Septim himself and given a task of joining the Blades, an organization whose only goal is to protect the Emperor. And while you do not have to do it straight away, or at all really, in an as open game as this one, and can instead join dozen or so of different guilds and work for them, or just laze around Morrowind seeking random quests and things to discover, if you do, you'll soon discover an ancient prophecy, an even more ancient, twisted and infinitely evil demigod who's bent on becoming all-powerful and possibly even taking over the Tamriel. And yes, this is where the game begins and lets you do your own thing, whatever that thing may be. The main story is maybe around 15 to 20 hours only, but everything that the game offers will easily take you a couple of hundreds of hours and is well worth experiencing. Morrowind was a magnum opus of fantasy RPG by 2002, and while perhaps not one anymore, it's still one of the most important, influential and fantastically playing games in the genre to this very day. It's a title that deserves a video of its own, as giving it anything less than a good 10-15 minutes of solid praise, followed by another 5 or 6 on its bugs, an additional 3 on those flowers that you can pick, is a sin. So yeah, I'm a sinner. Heroes of Might and Magic 4 is like haggis, a Scottish delight made out of sheep's innards and all the terrible things you can find in the world. Or natto, sticky, gooey and slimy Japanese fermented beans travesty that tastes like a mixture of mud and spoiled beans, but is supposedly the healthiest thing ever. Or even like bigos, a traditional Polish meal made out of sauerkraut and sausages, boiled to the point of smelling like a long and never-ending wet fart. Or, and finally, Marmite, British-made tool for breaking minds of war prisoners to get them to talk. It was used for inducing pain and to bring never-ending nightmares to children, exclusively. Also, so that we're clear here, I can appreciate all of them in the respective culinary scenarios and had them all more than once. So what I'm getting at here is that they're an acquired taste, and so is Heroes of Might and Magic 4. On the face value, it's just another Heroes game, following the amazing third entry and sticking to the tried and tested formula of mixing turn-based strategic overworld exploration with town and cities management and tactical, also turn-based combat, and all of that in an enchanting fantasy setting. So if you don't know a lot about the series and compare it to the earlier or latter, it may look like nothing new. It's not a game that just heated up the old cold burger in the microwave, however, and stuck it in between the couple of stale buns, so to speak. It actually garnished that odd sandwich with few extra and unexpected ingredients you'd not seen between these buns before. So heroes can finally truly join combat encounters in a more active way, running around the battlefield and supporting their troops. And if cultivated properly, they can become some of the strongest units by the late mid-game, so it's worth taking a good care of them. The creatures are no longer upgradable in towns, and instead of investing in a better building to gain access to the higher tier of a particular creature, you are now given a choice. When you erect a dwelling structure, the game allows you to pick one of the two quote-unquote versions of the creature to have spawn in it, and each of them is better suited for a different combat scenario. The choice is permanent too, so it's worth to give it a thought, keeping your long-term army plan in mind. The specializations that heroes get upon reaching top levels in their chosen paths are also something new and extra, and are a huge boost to their power. That said, reaching said bonuses will take you much longer than in earlier games, as for instance having Wisdom maxed out and all spells available is not longer possible in just a few level ups. And even that will be for just one of the many schools of magic, and getting a 20% boost in power in more will require you to spend extra time on them too. What's more, you can have more than one hero in the army, and all of them can use their skills in combat. Neutral armies can also move around the map, and you can send your own troops between the castles automatically without having to assign a hero to escort them. It's very useful in resupplying of your far-off armies. Creatures that you have in your armies or battle against can have their own abilities and magic spells too, and it's such a game changer you wouldn't believe, as they now have extra options other than just to shoot a projectile or attack. All of these changes are the biggest that Heroes 4 brought to the table, but there's a slew of smaller ones too. Point is, while it was a fantastic game in its own right, it was also one that was so different to what came before, and for that matter after too, that many fans of this series just straight up skipped it, waiting for the 5th game instead. Now, while I've not said it here yet I believe, I actually really liked the 4th game. I don't mind the changes, in fact I like the novelty and that the Heroes 4 actually tried to do its own thing, and believe it's one of the better entries in the series. Despite that though, there are two things I really dislike about it, and it's the interface and the graphics. And while I should really go into detail about them, I can summarize them in 2 sentences. First, you should probably try out, as I seem to be in the minority and most people didn't mind how it looked and operated. And the second, you've been watching the game while I was talking, so most likely you've made your own mind about it already. Either way, these are but small complaints, and the game overall is stellar and well worth coming back to in 2025. Even if just for those 72,378 just one more turns that many of us suffer from. What a fun freaking tastic start to the year. I mean, just check all of them classics. Aren't they just the best? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. If you enjoy me going randomly off topic and talking about rotten food, food creams and toys I played as a kid, hit those bell and subscribe buttons below, do not miss the next dose of random. But if you don't care about it at all and just enjoyed this video, like will be fine too. I am done for today though, and will be grabbing my late dinner. So stay well, eat good food and play games.